Today I'm going to take you through what we've seen through our analysis for the 2020 ozone season, how everything is looking. Can everyone see my screen just to verify? Excellent, awesome. Let me see. Now it's frozen. Hold on one second. Is it moving at all for you? I'm so sorry. Let me try.
Still on the title slide.
All right, now my mouse is moving. There we go. All right, so I'll start taking you through where we're going here with this here today. So when we look at our ozones, our seasonal forecasting as a whole, and in this case, looking towards the ozone season, what we're looking for, we start with looking at the ocean as a whole. We want to take a look at the various drivers that come from the ocean. It gives us an overall idea of what the pattern is going to look like. So we're looking at the sea surface temperatures specifically. It affects the ridge and trough patterns across the US and across the world as a whole. So we start off by looking at that. And there are three influential circulations that we like to analyze as we're going through this process. The first one being the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is a longer range oscillation, lasts about 20 to 30 years before it sees a phase change. Focuses on the Pacific Ocean stretching up into the Gulf of Alaska. We also have the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, which is another long-term pattern where the sea surface temperatures tend to stay the same for a long period of time, typically about 60 to 80 years. Now, during these longer durations, can there be times where there are dips where it may go down for a year, and instead of being in a positive phase, it goes negative for a year, then back to its mean positive? Yes. And those are things we do look for as we're working on the forecast as well to see if that's a potential. And as we work our way through, the other one that we look at with these two is how they work together. These two correlate pretty well in how they do affect our overall pattern going into spring, summer, and even into winter as well that we're just coming out of. And the third we look at is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, that deals with La Nina, El Nino, or being neutral in neutral phase. That has another effect on the pattern as well. When you combine all three together, you can get a mean pattern developed out of that will fluctuate at time with more short-term teleconnections, but this gives us an overall idea of what we're looking at on the broad scale from a month-to-month perspective. And part of that, when we're looking at it, where are we at now? Where are we headed? Looking out at the Pacific right now, there is a warm pocket out there of sea surface temperatures. However, if you see the cool little light blue shadings up by the Gulf of Alaska, that actually ends up leading to a negative phase of the PDO. Over in the Atlantic off the eastern seaboard, you can see a lot of yellows, reds, oranges picking up, looking to be in a positive phase of the AMO. So we're going to have a positive AMO, a negative PDO. And during the winter, we were in La Nina. We're still in La Nina now, down along the equator with the light blue shading. However, that is slowly starting to warm with time. As it's expected to go into the summer, we're expecting to see that weaken and become more of a neutral phase and be more in the in-between instead of being either in La Nina or El Nino. How that affects the pattern helps us more correlate with the PDO and AMO being the main drivers on that front. So thinking to that in the PDO and AMO and how I said that has a big effect on the pattern as a whole and how they correlate. There have been studies done showing the connection between the phases. Right now, what we're expecting going forward is a negative PDO and a positive AMO. That is in the black circle on your screen. That is showing where kind of drought conditions we could see develop as we go into summer and what we have going on currently. It actually matches up pretty well right now with where the drought is currently in those phases with what we're actually seeing happen. Now, in that ensemble blend that's down there in the bottom in the lower left, it does show some reds over Missouri heading up into the Great Lakes. Yes, we've had some drought at times. We've had that negated recently by our rain events heading into the spring, which is good. Could there be some building drought at times or abnormally dry conditions going forward into the summer? That is possible, but it seems that part of the correlation may be a little different this year because of the way the drought is already set up out there going forward and what we're seeing as we look at some other drivers going into it. But there is a nice connection, which helps us understand what the potential ridge trough pattern will look like across the US heading into the rest of spring into our summer months. So when we're looking through all of this, we're also looking at analog years. But what do I mean by that? We're looking for historical matches of previous years that have similar sea surface temperature patterns, similar teleconnections to help us assess what we could see coming up for us. So those matches are called analog years. In no particular order of which one's better versus the other here. This is just in chronological. Our historical matches at this point for the spring and the summer, we have 2018, 2011, 2009, 2008, 1976, 1965, and 1951. And I say there's not one that stands out among them yet. The reason for that is the transition season from winter to spring, there's a lot of variation in the models trying to help give us hints at what's down the road. They have a hard time resolving what we see in the spring. So we have to really rely on seeing the actual data and compare it to the analogs of what's actually happening. So we've just recently, as well, this past weekend, got in the data for March. Is fully in now. We were able to look at that. If we had to try and say if one way is hedging versus the other at this point, maybe we're closer from a near-term remembrance piece, 0809. Maybe we're closer to that than versus a 2011 or 18. And that has a lot to do actually with the latter half of summer as well. But in general, when we do an analog package, we're looking for one to give us an overall idea, because at some points, maybe 1951 is taking the lead, whereas 2011 may take the lead 1 month. That's why we're looking at the overall blend through it all. And we do try to find the standouts as we go. And right now, if I had to say we're looking at any that could be, again, 0809, those 2 summers may be our best fit at the moment. We'll see how that translates as we go forward into April. So what are we looking at from our expected patterns as we go into the summer? We're going to really break it down into 2 periods here. We see kind of from our analog package. We have April through June, and then July through October for the ozone season. Starting off here from April through June, you're going to see a lot of warmth out west. That has a lot to do also with the ongoing drought that's continued out there. That pattern doesn't seem to really be breaking down. Also correlates well with how the PDO and the AMO are setting up currently with the negative and positive phases respectively. That'll also drive ridging along the east coast with the high pressure over the Atlantic, working its way back into the northeast. So it puts us kind of in the squeeze play in between locally, gives us more troughing. Is there times where that'll break down? We'll get ridging locally, warmer days as we go through June and July. Absolutely, that can happen. But it won't be a situation where we see a mega ridge build in where it sets up and we stay hot and dry the entire time. The best shot at that being a continuous situation is out west, out into the Four Corners, out into California. Will there be wildfire concerns out there building through summer because of the drought again? Absolutely. We have to worry about smoke coming from that eventually downstream. Yes, potentially we will. I think that's really on the table again, the way the pattern is looking to set up the summer. Now, initially through June, from a precipitation perspective, we're going to stay near normal. So what does that mean for us? That really means chances every few days. Right now, for example, this week, we're fairly active. The chances here through Wednesday, we quiet down Thursday, have to watch a disturbance for the weekend to see if something can try to come out of that from precipitation. So we're going to have chances to also clean our environment locally from precipitation output every few days as well. So at the same time, where we could see some hot and dry come in, the environment could be cleared out prior to that. So then it's also looking upwind, looking down. Where's our plume coming from tomorrow to help? We're going to have any modification from that. But locally, our environment should also be very clean heading into those potentials as well. Now, as we go forward into the back end of summer, much different look than concerns when we see drought like that off to the west. The reason is we don't really see, with the troughing being overhead, seeing a lot of drought building expansive long-term drought into our region this summer. A lot of that's going to just continue where it has been, and that will affect our pattern. The PDO and AMO phases do not look to break down at any point this summer. So we're going to continue to see the ridging out on the west coast, down into the Gulf Coast as well, into the southeast, troughing over the top. So that means troughing up for us. We're in the base of a trough for much of the summer. Especially this back end, there are a lot of signals in the analog package that lead to us thinking there's not going to be a lot of extended warmth in the typical time of the summer that we would expect it to be. And when I say warmth, are we still going to have days where we get into the upper 80s and low 90s? That's seasonable when we get into July, August, September. We're still going to have that. But are we looking at extended periods of hundreds, extended heat waves, hot and dry, stagnant winds, high pressure? Doesn't seem to be that way with the pattern we're going to see. This gives us more of a potential for northwesterly flow, things coming from the northwest of Canada down through us. As that happens, that leaves us to more cleaner air potentially. The big wild card with all of that from an air quality perspective is then wondering about the wildfire situation that can build out west this summer as we continue to go into the peak heating parts of summer as we go into July, August, September. How much of an effect does that have on us as well? But from a local production perspective, those days seem very limited at all as we go into July, August, September, and the back end and through October here this year for us. From a precipitation perspective, also at the same time locally, with the way that pattern sets up, it does allow us to see more active pattern. So that again will help clean out our local air mass, keep us from seeing a building of stagnant local air and clearing it out, helping to clear out smoke too, at the same time clearing out the atmosphere as events do happen, to help at least modify us enough to not have as much of a concern. So all the drought that's always been on, it's been off for West now for a few years. We always have that concern in the back of our mind. Are we going to see another 2012? Is it going to build right into us? It still doesn't seem to be that way going forward this year, with the drought trying to build our way, given the way the sea surfaces are set up for us. So overall, looking at some of our most recent years that we have data for, this is how those years in our from analog package match up. And again, they're just in chronological order, but I'll focus on 08 and 09 summers as we get to them. How 2018 played out, had a fairly balanced green-yellow scenario for the most part through August. And then obviously more greens as we got to the back end of September and October, with our alerts being more focused around May, June, July, and August for our alert days that season. With even one red there in July. 11, that was as we were building up to our drought year of 2012. So we were already starting to dry out some in 2011. So we saw more of our alert days as we got towards July and August, the typical peak heating times of the year where we would see that. And they were kind of spread out fairly evenly on the potential. We had at least one a month, with the exception of May that year. That doesn't seem to be the fit, especially for the start of the season with April, the way the pattern's looking, which I'll touch on more here at the end. 2009. Now, April, yes, we had an orange that year. It's more related to a form of Flint Hills burning and the smoke aspect there. But the thing to take away from this in 2009, more of our alert days were early season. There was one in August, yes. Could that happen this year? For sure, that could happen in this situation as well. But there's a lot more greens, green days and clean days versus elevated or alert days even in 2009. And the way the pattern is set up right now, that seems very well on the table that we're seeing more of the cleaner days with some moderates and some alerts, but not an extensive amount of alert days at the same time, and more early season potential on that. 2008 was a very clean season as well. Yes, July and August were the quote unquote dirtiest months that we had because we had alert days then. We had two exceedances, one July, one August that year. But there's the big takeaway from all of this, though, is there's a lot more clean than there is dirtier air, and that's due to the pattern being helping to be able to reset itself fairly frequently with that trough being in our region. So looking at this, the overall specifics for our season, kind of a summary of this, a large driver of our pattern this year for us will be that drought out west, where the heat is going to be the most persistent, as is the drought, the high pressure, all of that leading to potential wildfires out that way, more ozone and PM 2.5 concerns out that way for them, versus us being more in the trough here to the east. Now with that, we're still going to have more seasonable bouts more often than not. Occasionally, we're going to get 1 to 3 days at a time where we can build that warmth and maybe build a ridge, but we're also going to clear out before we get to that point, heading into those expansive heat pieces of time, and then we'll see that clear out again as another front comes through, pushes us back down to seasonable levels right thereafter. Our best opportunity at these warm shots really will be through June, and probably more so May and June. Really, at this point, the way that the rest of April is looking at around the 12th now, and time's flying because before you know it'll be May 1st already. But the way that, and I'll talk about the rest of April here in a second. But it seems like our best shot is going to be this early season. Thinking we're more like in 08 and 09 currently. As we see how April evolves, it'll also give us more confidence in that 08, 09 potential versus it being 11 or 18 side of things from a top analog perspective. And then July through October, as we get into the peak times where we're most concerned about ozone production, the peak heating months of July, August, and into September, It looks to be more seasonable to even some bouts of cool at times because of the way that ridge will continue to be stagnant out west, more troughing prominently over us locally. That should help keep our ozone levels in check during those peak months, like the 08, 09 for the most part, with a couple exceedance potentials here or there. That, again, it looks to be there. That's there for sure that potential could happen, but it looks to be short-lived at the same time. It does not have to be an extended period of hot, dry over the entire area. Now, with that, looking at the overall season, kind of want to loop back to where we are currently. We do produce a product in-house for mid-range forecasts that we send out weekly. Kind of gives a look out over the next 21 days. And this is the most recent forecast. It'll actually be going out tomorrow. I've been working on it over the past week, and last analysis was done on it last night. How are we looking? Well, over the next week or so, we're actually going to be seeing a pattern shift occur, where we see some cooler days coming up. Now, unseasonably cool, so we're looking to be more highs in the upper 40s, low 50s heading into next week. But we're also seeing a more drier pattern working at the same time, but it's more northwesterly flow. So that means we're getting more Canadian air coming down to us versus it coming out of the south and southwest, coming up from Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Dallas. We're not seeing the airflow come from there. We're seeing it more coming up in the Dakotas, Montana, up into British Columbia, Alberta areas coming down towards us. So that pattern shift will be able to give us more of a northwesterly flow scenario through about the 23rd to 24th of the month. Then the pattern does look to flip. That's when we get back to more of the southwest flow. That will help us have more of the potential with southwesterly wind days, warmer days to bring in, watch the upwind from the Flint Hills, from Oklahoma, from Texas, to see how that does from a modification standpoint of the air mass coming from there. And we will have potential for warmer days at that point. Now, what does warm this time of the year mean? Upper 70s, low 80s for highs. Could we have some potentials there we'll have to watch for? Yes. But again, there's also rain chances on some of those times too when we have warmer days as well. So it's a balance between more active potential and the heat. Can we get it to match up where we have just heat and hot and dry with some upwind contributions to give us ozone alert days? We'll have to watch for that for sure. But right now, with the rain chances being more active in a southwesterly flow, that will try to offset that local build and upwind as well. If they're active as well, we'll clean their environment out too. So it's a fine balance of time. Just looking at the pattern maps across the U.S. as a whole from a temperature perspective, through the 20th, cooler for a lot of the U.S. And locally for us, dry. Most active is down to the southeast and offshore east. Up through the 20th is going to be along the Gulf states at this point in the season. Then as we go towards that pattern flip after around the 23rd to 24th time frame, that'll put us into more southwesterly flow, but still fairly seasonable on temperatures overall. Will there be bouts of times where we're warmer? Yes, that's definitely a possibility for us. We'll have to watch for that. And overall, it is still drier, but the few chances we do have from a individual day perspective, they could match up with our warmer days, which would help us not be as concerned about ozone potential and ozone alert day potential on those specific days. That's our overall outlook for the ozone season of 2022 at this point, and giving a quick glance into where we are currently over the next month as well. While the ozone may not be crazy at times, we got baseball back again this season. The Royals are off and running, which is always great to see. So we do get some dry days, make sure to see if we can get some time out at the ballpark. Always a good time for sure. And I hope all this information was helpful, and I'll take any questions that you have at this time about the ozone season outlook.
Questions? You're welcome to drop them in the chat or shout them out.
Yes, I have one for you, Sully. This is Doug. Looking ahead then at that last product that you showed,
yeah,
kind of through the end of April, it would look like perhaps next week, midweek into the weekend would be prime time for Flint Hills burning.
Yeah, so with it being a more northwesterly flow situation, from a surface wind perspective, when I say northwesterly flow, that means loft, but also at the surface, that can mean we have winds coming from the northwest as well, and potentially from the west, just depending on how the surface high pressure sets up. Yes, but it does look to be prime. The winds don't look to be, there don't look to be any major systems coming through at that point to tighten up the pressure to allow us to have windy days like the wind we're going to see today out there. But we're also doesn't see we don't see situations setting up where we get a southwesterly flow in that pattern either, where we're going to see the winds coming out of the Flint Hills, pushing smoke up towards the Kansas City area. It seems like it'd be more hanging out there, either moving south or potentially due north, depending on how the wind does set up. We're just not, that pattern isn't conducive for us to see southwesterly winds at the surface.
Okay, and it looks like it's a pretty big window. So if you've got large acreages that you're trying to cover,
yes,
that looks like a great big target.
Mhm.
Aaron, this is Janae. First of all, thank you for that very interesting report. I really appreciate it. And I think the lens I'm looking at it through is that it looks like it's good news in terms of our vulnerable populations here in the region. What I'm hearing is we're not expecting an extraordinarily hot summer or flooding or significant precipitation, which I think is good news for our vulnerable folks. So thank you for that report.
You're welcome.
And Sully, I have a question, and I think I know the answer to this, but maybe it might be useful information for the rest of the forum. But as we kind of move through the spring and maybe you're seeing patterns change, will you go back and look at perhaps different analog years and kind of reassess the rest of the season based on that?
Absolutely. As we go through, so this is like our preliminary first look was back in February. We started looking at the summer to see how things were evolving, see what potential analog years we had or historical matches. Then as we got into March, it's okay, let's start refining off of what we're seeing happen. We assess it on a monthly basis, looking at the data as it comes in. So there could be new analogs that do come into play. As we move forward, there could be ones that we are able to take out of the equation as on the whole as well. You know, to think back, to give some background on that, for example, thinking back to February, an initial look at that pattern of how the drought could try to build in here when we were still abnormally dry at that point, it was getting concerning. I was like, okay, do we really have that potential? Is a 2012 analog potentially there? Thankfully, no, it doesn't fit because of the way the pattern has been evolving. That March, that April were very hot, very dry. We were off to the hot and dry race really quick that season. It just does not fit with the overall upper level pattern either. So we're able to take that out, and yes, we'll be able to assess it as we go forward. So if something does change with this, obviously I will reach out to you ahead of any meetings.
Great.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for that report.
You're welcome.